Before we get started, I will mention this video will have some light spoilers regarding some of the events that happen later in the game and footage of some early areas, so if you want to go into the game completely blind, I recommend clicking out the video. With that out of the way, please enjoy. Based on the title, it could be assumed that CrossCode is an MMO, but that is not the case. Well, sort of. Now for context, I have attempted to play MMOs in the past, but I could never get into them for too long due to a variety of reasons. Combat felt lacking, the grind seemed like too much, quests weren't interesting enough, at least in the beginning. I would usually never play long enough to get to like mid-game or end-game. But yeah, so I was pretty skeptical when I first picked this game up, seeing as you play in one. But they use that setting to their advantage, and the result is simply amazing. You play as a player character named Leah in an MMO called Crossworlds, but it's a single-player game with an emphasis on its narrative and puzzle solving. At first, it will seem fairly similar to most MMOs. Kill X amount of enemies or get X amount of items to complete quests. You know, the usual affair. As the game progresses, the quests become more creative and engaging, with the story having one of the most powerful moments in gaming that I've experienced so far. It all culminates to give the player a unique action RPG experience and a standout title even amongst the other standout indie games. As I mentioned earlier, there is a huge focus on puzzle solving, with a hefty amount of action platforming not unlike Zelda. Environments are filled with ledges, secret areas, and other obstacles to look out for when exploring them. Dungeons have plenty of challenging puzzles, combat sequences, and are usually concluded with a boss fight that combines both elements to beat. As you progress through the game, you will get up to 4 elemental powers to control: fire, cold, wave, and shock, each with their own combat abilities and puzzle-solving techniques. Constantly switching elements on the fly becomes crucial in taking out some of the stronger late-game enemies. What makes everything feel so natural and good to control is the mobile combat system. Leah, your avatar character you control, moves at a good pace with up to 3 quick dashes, a shield, a melee weapon, and an infinite spawning ping pong ball to use at her disposal. Each action also has access to a special move, which makes trying out new ways to play feel rewarding. The interesting part of combat is knowing when to switch between melee to maximize damage, or stay back to zone enemies out with the ping pong balls. There is an official name for the ball throwing system, but saying ping pong balls does a good job describing what it's like using them. Holding in a direction on the R analog stick makes it so you can aim and charge up a big ball that can bounce off walls. Its main use is to solve puzzles and cause a break status effect on certain enemies, which allows you to get in close with your melee attacks to finish it off. As you get further into the game, new combat abilities are unlocked, which allows you to cancel normal attacks into special ones. Speaking of cancels, one of the reasons all the different combat mechanics work so well together is because it gives you the ability to cancel all of them into each other. Cancel a special move into a dash to reduce the recovery on it and avoid an enemy attack. Cancel shield into an attack, or vice versa. It allows for such fluid control of what you're doing that once mastered, it feels like you're unstoppable. For a system as freeform as this one, the enemies themselves need to be able to put up a fight or the game would be too easy. Thankfully, we have a healthy variety of enemies ranging from mild annoyances to powerhouses, which forces the player to adapt unless they want to die repeatedly. This isn't even including boss fights that incorporate puzzle-solving mechanics into them. Each area presents new enemies, so the strategies I used during my playthrough had to be constantly adjusted to deal with new combat scenarios. What really surprised me is when I entered my first PvP battle. It's a single-player game, but during some parts of the story, Leah will be challenged to a 1v1 duel with another character. It's in an enclosed space, use of items is removed, and the opponent has the same abilities as you. Not only that, but they play like you're fighting a real human, to an extent. The AI here does a pretty good job overall at mixing randomness with set patterns, so it makes for an engaging fight overall. There's not too many of them, but each one was always so fun to do because of how different they feel from fighting regular enemies. Late game gives access to more of these types of fights, but I'll get into that later on. Regarding how the game handles skill progression, you get a skill tree similar to the one seen in Final Fantasy X, where it sort of branches out and you can choose which routes you want to go for to match your playstyle. They can range from flat stat increases to more powerful special moves. Once you obtain a new elemental power, it also gains its own skill tree, each having different stat bonuses. For example, the fire element gave my offense a boost, but the cold element reduced my offense while boosting my defense. You're able to reset your points once you get far enough in the game in case you want to try a new build out. There's a wide variety of weapons and armor to choose from, some that add additional abilities to further customize how the game is played. Momentum, being one of my favorites, gives you a 10% damage increase after you dash that also stacks. So doing 3 dashes in a row to avoid projectiles, while getting in close to an enemy for the 30% damage buff, rewards the player for good movement by having certain fights go smoother than usual. Your weapon never changes on screen, which is a bit of a shame, but it's not a big deal. Usually it's made up by the fact that the weapons themselves are referencing some piece of media or icon. One of my favorites is the core drill, which when upgraded enough it will become the infinity spiral drill, being an obvious reference to the anime Gurren Lagann.
Huh? 宝物を掘り当てることだってある。
As a final note for the combat, the game has a ranking system similar to the one seen in the Devil May Cry games, where the longer you are in combat, the higher it goes up. And once you get to S rank, well, this happens. While I don't think the combat is the most difficult part of the game, it certainly gives the player enough depth and tools to mess around with to be engaging throughout the 40 to 50 hour runtime. Now, on to what the game is probably most known for, the puzzles. You're going to have to really stretch your brain to solve some of these, and I'm not just talking about the ones in the dungeon. The puzzles in the other areas you explore are a whole nother thing in general. Dungeon puzzles are usually isolated within a single room or screen, so other than just figuring it out, there's not much else to worry about. What you need to solve the puzzle is right in front of you. Solving puzzles in the open area requires getting to a high enough height to reach a certain level, then jumping across various pillars or rock formations to get to the chest or switch. Even within the first area, one of the puzzles takes me across 3 screens to just get one chest. So the goal of a lot of these open area puzzles is to find the first ledge to jump onto and take it from there. These same rules apply to the chests that can be found in towns or villages as well. Being observant can help boost the amount of items and secrets you find during the playthrough. I will say for most areas it's not too bad, and the rewards you get are pretty good. However, Gaia's Garden is puzzle hell, if that's even a thing. I spent hours trying to find every chest, and I'm still missing a good chunk of them. I got to a point where I had to call it quits and just continue on with the game unless I wanted to go insane. Mind you, I didn't look up any guides, and I'm not exactly an expert at puzzle solving, so this might be easier for other people than you, but for me, it was a pain in the ass. Now, while the puzzles in the open areas could be a bit annoying, the ones in the dungeon were one of the highlights of my playthrough. Again, not unlike Zelda, you will receive a new element in a dungeon and will have to make use of it to solve combat or puzzle problems that get in your way. The final dungeon being an exception with requiring the use of all elements and knowledge of how they work to surpass it. Each dungeon features various objects that need to be interacted with in creative ways to solve them. It makes the player become comfortable with how these objects work and is crucial to defeating certain enemies. One such enemy being the final boss of any given dungeon. Like I mentioned earlier, the boss is both a fight and a puzzle at the same time. However, you're usually only given a limited amount of time to figure out what you have to do before you can deal damage, adding an extra layer of tension to the whole fight. Other than that, dungeons play out how you think they would. Get through multiple rooms by completing puzzles or defeating enemies until you reach the end. The end of every dungeon means a break from the action for a bit and a shift to focus on the narrative, mainly viewed through Leah's eyes. I would like to keep this section brief because the story is best experienced without knowing anything, but some people need a bit of a hook to commit to playing something. I'll lightly go over how the story pans out without spoiling the major events. Again, the beginning of the game isn't its strongest points in terms of quest design or unique events. However, what it does do well is get the player more immersed with the in-game MMO Cross Worlds and not the actual game you're playing, CrossCode. What I mean by this is you're pretty much playing an MMO until the story becomes more the focus. It lulls you into a false sense of security until you hit the climax, which makes you rethink everything you've been doing up until that point. But it's not like the entire story is told in one moment. Leah gets flashbacks after progressing far enough that showcase events or conversations that happened in her past with recent memories of playing mixed in. These happen periodically while playing and don't make much sense on their own. They're shown to be a reminder that another narrative is being told, one the player is not aware of, and one that I will not be talking about until the end of this video. So in case you're interested on my thoughts regarding the major events that happen, and have already played the game, please stick around till the end. What we can talk about now is the characters and how delightful they are to be around. Starting with Leah. When she enters the game, she isn't able to use her speech function correctly, so she can't say anything other than her name or hi for the first couple of hours. The thing that makes her stand out compared to other members of the cast is how expressive she is, which lets the player have a good understanding of what kind of person she is, even without being able to hear her. I enjoyed playing as her and seeing the various reactions she would have in certain situations. As the game goes on, she gets access to more words, which lets her personality shine even brighter. One thing that I'll mention now is how during dialogue segments, her sprite gets animated when changing expressions while other characters don't. I believe this was done on purpose because other characters define themselves by what they say, and with Leah, that just isn't possible. So to make up for it, they gave Leah extra animations to make her stand out amongst the cast, which I thought worked in the game's favor. Over the course of the game, Leah will meet various people she'll be able to party up with to explore the world and form relationships with. One of the first being Amelie, a competitive spunky girl who meets Leah before the first tutorial dungeon. She will be one of the main companions you can have in your party and someone that usually offers some sort of comic relief during exploration. The writing in this game's narrative is quite good, and I'm happy to say it's present during minor character interactions as well. Even with Leah's limited vocabulary, Amelie brings out a lot of the personality from her, and you can tell they would be good friends no matter how they met. She mixes in French into her speech, so it's safe to assume she is from France, which lets us know just how widespread the MMO Crossworlds is. While your first party member is Amelie, the first character Leah forms a bond with is Sergey. He's introduced as the person who put you into Crossworlds and acts as a guide on what to do. It is assumed he has a hand in the development of Crossworlds, but other than that, not much else is known. He is key in improving Leah's vocabulary as he can add different words over time, which fleshes out the conversation between the two of them. Next would be Apollo, whose first appearance has him claiming Leah to be a cheater, and after that starts an ongoing rival that continues until the end of the game. This dude knows he is in an MMO and lets his alter ego take over, not unlike how many of us might play a game like this. Since both him and Leah are the same class, he feels an urge to show her how to be a proper spearmancer. He becomes a party member later on, but early minions are used for the PvP battles I talked about earlier. Coming with his own theme, he was always a joy to see whenever he popped up. Briefly going over two of the other relevant members, Citron and Lucas. Citron being what seems to be a nerdy guy who has an abundance of useless knowledge and a design to represent it. Lucas, being a fellow from Germany, comes off as a friendly older brother who has been playing the game before Leah entered it. There are other characters you will meet while playing, but this is more of a preview of what kind of characters you might encounter. Overall, they're pretty great, and I enjoyed the interaction they had with each other, whether it was through the story or from random dialogue while exploring. An important factor to getting your game noticed is how it looks. CrossCode has a style clearly inspired by older SNES RPGs, most notably Chrono Trigger. It's a hard sell to people who are only used to games that look like you're playing through real life instead of a game. On the other hand, it's an easy sell to people who enjoy the pixelated look which reminds them of great games from the SNES era. I enjoy how it looks, the colors pop, and each area has a distinct palette that makes it easy to tell them apart. The sprite work seems to be high quality, at least it looks like it to me, but I'm no professional in sprite work, so I could be wrong. I have no complaints with how it looks, but I understand it's not for everyone. Now, the music for this game is something everyone can appreciate, with such a wide range of tunes featuring upbeat techno, to an adventurous melody, to whatever this is. I don't think it's going to win awards for anything, but the music does its job of enhancing events and make playing through the game a pleasant experience. If it's not obvious by now, I adore this game and consider it one of the best I've played. The way it blends its narrative with the MMO setting was so well done that I find it hard for other games of the same genre to beat. Not only that, but you can even have a good boy as a companion, and you can pet him. So yeah, 10 out of 10.